How's it going, Eliminators? Today, I'm going to be showing you how to adjust the skid shoes on a snowblower. So with that being said, let's get right into it. So today in the shop, I have in front of me my own personal Craftsman 825 snowblower here, and we are going to be adjusting the skid shoes on the bottom of the auger housing. However, before we get into that, I am going to be addressing something that's commonly missed, but is an important step before adjusting the skid shoes on your snowblower. So before we get into the skid shoe adjustment, the first thing we're going to be talking about today is going to be tire pressure. And tire pressure is very important to the even wear of your metal skid shoes on the bottom of your auger housing. And that's because if you have one tire, let's say the right one, that has a lower PSI in it than the left tire, the right side of your snowblower will be sitting lower. So we're at the front of the snowblower now, and again, for this example, we're going to say that the right tire has a lower PSI than the tire on the left. So not only are you going to get an uneven wear on your skid shoe, you also may be unevenly wearing your scraper bar, and we're going to get into that in a moment. So coming back down to the tire, you guys can see these are new tires that have been installed on this older Craftsman. We got these from Stens and they work awesome. But the first thing we're going to do is use a digital meter here and just read out the PSI that are in these tires. Now, it doesn't matter what PSI you run, whether you want to run lower pressure like 5 or 10 PSI or a little bit higher like 15 or 20 PSI, that's fine. Just keep in mind that we want both tires to be pressurized to the same PSI. And just checking the right tire, I have 10 PSI of air in it. And coming over to the tire on the left, you guys can see this one also has 10 PSI. So once you get both tires filled to the same pressure, the next step is going to be to position your snowblower to a place that is as level as possible. So while ideally you would want to use something like a concrete pad that's nice and smooth and level, not everyone has that. And unfortunately today, we're getting wind speeds of about 50 miles an hour outside. So I have no choice but to film in my garage, which as you can see has an asphalt floor, and I do have some rubber mats laid out. So I've positioned this snowblower to the point where it's as level as I can get it. But before we move on to adjusting the skid shoes, there's actually one more step that I want to talk about if you have chains on your tires. A lot of older snowblowers have smoother tires, and it's very common to see people running chains on those tires. Now, this is going to be an important step because when you position your snowblower to level the skid shoes, you want to make sure that the tire is not sitting up on a chain. Now, you can buy tire chains that have more or less links, but the big thing is going to be you want to try your best to get the chains to the offset position so that your snowblower's tire is sitting on the rubber and not up on the chain itself. If it is sitting up on the chain, what's going to happen is it's going to totally throw off the level of your snowblower, and it's going to make it very difficult for you to get a proper level on the auger housing. So once you've properly leveled the rear of your snowblower, we're once again going to come back to the front of the auger housing. However, we're still not going to be adjusting the skid shoes. At this time, you want to determine what type of driveway you have. And when I say that, I mean what material is your driveway made out of? Is it concrete, asphalt, or gravel? Because that's going to determine the thickness of the shim that we use to lift up the front of the auger housing. Now, the smoother your driveway is, the lower that scraper bar can be. But the one thing you want to know is the scraper bar should not be coming in contact with the ground. And that is why I'm going to be making an adjustment on this snowblower today. Now, Aaron's recommends that their snowblowers be set to 1/8 of an inch for smooth surfaces such as concrete, and for gravel, you want to have a setting of 1 1/4 inch. And setting the scraper bar to a higher height is going to prevent your auger and your second stage impeller from loading up with gravel. Now, they don't really have a setting for an asphalt driveway, which is what I'm going to talk about next. Now, as long as my customers say that they do not have a gravel driveway, I like to use these generic paint sticks. They're flat, level, and long enough to the point where you can put them under the scraper bar and then make your adjustment. And they are thick enough to the point where you get a nice clean cut. So I have the digital vernier calipers here because I did want to measure this and get a readout for you. This paint stick here measures 0.1875 of an inch. And coming over here to my BDI fraction to decimal equivalent chart, you can see here that 0.1875 is 3/16 of an inch, and that's right in between a reading of 1/8 of an inch and 1/4 of an inch down there. So once you decide what thickness of shim you want to use, go ahead and lift up on your auger housing, and then just as you see here, lay your shim down on your level surface, and then set the scraper bar down on top of that. Once again, this is why I like to use those paint sticks, because they're long and flat enough to the point where I don't need two of them, and I don't have to worry about one being thicker or thinner than the other one. Now at this point, your skid shoes should be off the ground, just as mine are here. And we are relying on the slots that have been cut into the skid shoe that will allow us to drop the skid shoe down once we loosen those nuts off. So using a 1/2-inch socket on my Milwaukee Impact, we'll go ahead and get these loose. Once you loosen those off, you can lower the skid shoe down with a little bit of pressure. Now these are what are known as carriage bolts, so they do have a smooth rounded head on the inside of the auger housing. You just want to make sure that when you're tightening them up, they're all the way fully depressed. So the inside of the carriage bolt looks a little something like that. So just rotate it until it pops into place. Just like that. So once you get everything lined up, go ahead and tighten them up. After tightening those bolts up, I repeated the same step on the other side, so I can now remove the paint stick under the scraper bar that I used as a shim. You can now see that we have a nice even gap underneath our scraper bar. That'll ensure that I get a nice clean cut on my driveway. So now that I've shown you how to adjust your skid shoes, one thing that I briefly wanted to discuss before wrapping up today's video was going to be picking out a nice thick set of skid shoes that'll last a lot longer than some of these cheaper versions. Now what you can do is get yourself a tape measure and measure from center to center of your bolts, and then you can basically select a quality pair of skid shoes. So what you see in front of us here is a Stenz 780-282. These, however, are going to be 3/16 of an inch thick, the same thickness as the paint stick there. So they're a nice, thick, durable steel that they're made out of. And what you'll notice is that they're reversible. So you can run the left on the right, and once one side gets really worn out, you can also flip them and use the other side. And what that's going to do is essentially double the life of that skid shoe, because you can flip it over and use the other side until that side gets worn. And being in the business that I am in, repairing these snowblowers all the time because I do seasonal work, I have boxes of these things, all different kinds for all different manufacturers. And some of them, such as these AYP ones that Craftsman are using, have these diagonal slots, so they actually move forwards and backwards as you raise or lower them. These ones, like I said, they're made out of a much thinner material. They are not flippable, so they only have the skid shoe on the one side. And the interesting thing here is they actually make a right and a left one. So you have to buy two separate pieces in order to replace your skid shoes, which is kind of unfortunate. Whereas like these ones here, you guys can see Husqvarna. Check these things out. Super durable, again, flippable, reversible. That's the way you want to go. So once again, just measure center to center on those bolts, and then go ahead and get yourself a nice durable pair of skid shoes. And one last thing that I did want to mention, and this kind of goes back to one of your tires being a lower pressure than the other one. Maybe one of your skid shoes is really worn down. The scraper bar can also wear unevenly because of that. And I just wanted to mention that the scraper bar itself is also replaceable. So you're going to notice those carriage bolts on the back of that. That can be adjusted, or if need be, can be replaced as well. And once again, lower for concrete, higher for gravel. For asphalt, pretty much anywhere in between, depending on how level your asphalt driveway is. If it's got some deep potholes and spots where it's sunk in, then you may want to raise it up a little bit. Again, I use just a generic paint stick, 3/16 of an inch. I do that for all my own equipment as well as all my customers' equipment, and I've never had any complaints. They always give me a nice clean cut. Well, that's going to be it for today's video. If you guys enjoyed it, think about leaving me a thumbs up. It really helps me out. You can click here to subscribe, and click over here to watch one of my previous videos. I upload every single week, so be sure to stop on by next week. Check channel out for new content. And as always, guys, thanks for watching.